Hello everyone and welcome back to the Cyclocross Social podcast. Racing under the floodlights in Diegem, always one of the best races of the season, the night action there. We had a thriller of a men's race, and with me here to discuss the action is Issam.
Yes, thank you for having me.
After a long drive from Besançon, I made it home comfortably in time for the start of the Women Elite race. We'll discuss that in a bit because we should really start with that men's race. That was a cracker of a race. My summary will be quite short because if I need to tell everything that happened there, I would just be summarizing the entire race. Andrew Strohmeyer took the fastest start. He shot off a rocket before falling back to 23rd position. But even without Strohmeyer, there were still a lot of contenders for victory. For the first part of the race, we had 10, 15-ish riders clinging together. Definitely in the second half, that was reduced to 10 and ultimately 3 riders. We'd seen a couple of attacks. Michael van Toerenhout had gotten a gap. We had seen, for instance, Niels van der Putten make a small move. Zweek made some moves. Nijs made some moves. Kamp even made a move. But ultimately, it came down to the final 2 laps. In the penultimate lap, van Toerenhout crashed. And that opened a gap for Zweek. Zweek placed the attack. Nijs needed to react to close that gap. Things came together, and in the final lap, we headed to a new duel. Zweek and Van der Putten opened a gap because Nijs made a mistake before the off-camber. Nijs needed to launch a big attack on the road climb and bridged up to them. Nijs then didn't waste too much time, took the lead ahead of the sand pit. But after the sand pit, he placed another attack. Zweek was on the wheel, needed to leave a few meters. Then we came to the barrier. Zweek was back on the wheel. Nijs placed another attack. Zweek again distanced briefly, but managed to come back. Nijs had the explosiveness, but Zweek had the longevity in those attacks. As we approached the final minute of the race, Zweek lined up for an overtake. He knew he had to take the stairs first, so as we came to the final bridge of the lap, he took a wider line, lining up the overtake. He overtook Nijs over the top of the climb. It was game over, at least that's what Zweek thought. He thought he had it in the bag. But on the running section, Nijs placed a sprint. He turned into Noah Lyles, placed the sprint, overtook Zweek, but then he didn't have the legs to continue. Zweek at the latest of moments placed another dive bomb down the inside of Nijs. He completed the overtake, took the stairs first, sprinted to victory. Nijs couldn't get in his pedal, was frustrated, then also got passed by Van der Putten, so the eventual podium was Zweek, Van der Putten, Nijs. Lots of moments in these races, Issam, but for me, ultimately, the deciding moment was early in that final lap, and that's related to the penultimate lap. There were these super tight 180s, and you could see riders running it and other riders riding it. Nijs was riding them all race. Riding, if you could, was probably 1, maybe 2 seconds faster, so you could definitely say it was worth it. But in the penultimate lap, let's start there. Nijs comes into that corner. Nijs was taking a very wide line into the first one to make it to the second one. That left the door open for Iserbyt. Iserbyt sent it down the inside. Nijs needed to dab and just about managed to stay ahead of Iserbyt. Compare that to Zweek. In the penultimate lap, Zweek was riding because he was in the lead. But in the final lap, he got overtaken by Van der Putten before and decided to run. That was a much safer option. Nijs, however, in the final lap was also deciding to run, and he made that mistake there. But regardless of that mistake or not, with the lines he was taking, the door was wide open. Iserbyt needed to put a dive bomb in there, which he probably would have done again in the final lap because there was just tons of space. And then we would have ended in the same situation. And to me, what Zweek did is what Nijs lacked there. Nijs decided to stick with what was the fastest on paper, but not necessarily in the group, taking a lot of risks. It just about went right in the penultimate lap. It didn't go right in the final lap. As a result, Nijs needed to put in that impressive but very expensive attack on the road climb. He brings it up to the leaders, but then doesn't have the legs to finish it off. He says his legs were just completely dead at that final part, and that makes a lot of sense. To me, that was the deciding moment in the race, that mistake early in that lap.
Yeah, for the last lap, for sure, I can totally agree with you on that part, because I think that the energy that he had to spend on that long asphalt climb, that's what definitely didn't look easy, and it's definitely not the effort you want to make on a last lap, but he had to do so because he was in that situation. And as you say, I think at that point, especially there in the last lap, you have to think a little bit more practical. You have to make sure that you cover things off and go for safe. And he didn't do that. I think he, obviously Nice is someone that is very comfortable with his technique and is comfortable with his bike handling. But we have seen many editions, and that corner is always a corner in which riders kind of have to make that decision between staying on your bike and trying to just maneuver them while riding, or you just, you get off your bike and you do it negotiated running. And although you could potentially be just that tiny bit faster, staying on your bike, especially because you don't have to on your bike again after you negotiate the corners, it's a risk in a way. And as you explained it well, I think that was it was just too big of a risk, and he makes that mistake. He leaves the door kind of open, and it just costs you so much in the end. And I think, if you look at the entirety of Nice's race, it was far from perfect. He had to chase from lap 1, then got in the mix, then had to close that gap to Zweek together with Van de Putte because of Van Toerenhout that crashed there, apparently. So for Nice, it was far from a perfect race. And I think beforehand, we definitely saw Nice as honestly as the favorite because of him not being not racing in Besançon, and probably having some form of sort of freshness in a way. And yeah, in the end, I think that he definitely had the legs, or had the possibility to win. But I think that if you look at the way Zweek was racing today, I don't think that he was ever outside the top 4. I think that he was always up there at the front. When he got that gap because of Van Toerenhout's mishap, he made use of that. He put them under pressure. At that point, when they caught him back, I thought this is going to be a difficult situation for Zweek, because you were kind of forced into an attack. Does he have enough left in the end? But God, that last lap, the moves that he made there, the moves that he pulled up on Nice, and being overtaken there, as you say, Nice really giving it his all in the sprint, and then still being able to cover it off, take the inside there on the bridge, and win the sprint, and also going up the stairs, and that sprint in the end, which wasn't really necessary at that point. But it just shows that he definitely had something left in the end for the last lap. And it was an incredible race. I think arguably you could say it was the best race of the season, in my opinion. I think we had so many scenarios, we had so many riders that probably had an idea of winning. At the moment, I only have discussed 2, because I haven't even mentioned Van de Putte, who also rode a very good race in his regard.
Yeah, I think we'll circle back to Van de Putte in a bit, and it might be the best race of the season. It's certainly up there. We've been treated to many good races this season, and it's also the nature of the course in Diegem. It's almost half a road race. There's so much road in there, and then just combine it. It's a city center crit. It's good racing, and there's nothing wrong with a race like that every once in a while, a typical course. I definitely agree that Nice came in as the favorite. I don't think it bothered him too much. Zweek, on the other hand, as you said, he executed perfectly. He pretty much didn't make any mistakes. He was constantly in position. He had 2 moments where he kind of got gifted a bit of a lead and put some pressure on the rest, but definitely saved something till the end. I liked his comments, like in the end, I was just bluffing. Like, when Nice overtook me running, I just thought it was over, but I just decided to bluff. Pretend everything was fine and give it another go. Give it another go. Just give it another go. Keep going. Keep trying. We can definitely also conclude that yesterday he took an off day himself. He didn't have an off day. He just took a rest day. He saw that course, decided this is not for me. Tomorrow I give it another go. And that should be considered a wise decision, considering he takes the win here. And also, if it had been a podium, it would have been a wise decision. Those overtakes, I like the one up the bridge. You could see him already kind of lining it up in that section of corners before that. He was taking a slightly different line, sacrificing his entry speed to put in the acceleration. He had just something more left. And as I said in my summary, Zweek had the longevity. He had the ability to continue his pace, whereas Nice had the explosiveness. After the barriers, after the sand, it was Nice who had that punch. Zweek was able to continue that effort a bit longer. And definitely when Nice passed him running, I thought, oh, this is going to be game over for Zweek. Because if you recall to that battle in the final lap between Van Aert and Pidcock here 2 years ago, that was also the spot where Van Aert had made his move. And from there on, there was really no way around it anymore for Pidcock. But Zweek, you could also see his experience there. In that 180, he came down the inside, but also took a very, very defensive line. You see less experienced riders move back to the outside, trying to retake the racing line. Not Zweig. He just commits to the defense, knows that he completely bogs that corner, knows that it's super, super, super slow what he's doing, but he knows that he has the track position. And then he does kind of make the mistake of moving back to the outside racing line, opening the ability for Nice to sprint around there. But in the end, that's also racing. You can't do everything perfect. It's the heat of the moment, and it's also just an impressive move by Nice there, running more than anything else. That was a really impressive sprint. I think you mentioned some fair points that Nice needed to chase throughout the race, and something that you didn't mention so far was his first lap. What happened there? Because in the start, Van der Haar went straight, and then Nice was like 25th.
Yeah, well, Nice was kind of screwed there by Van der Haar in a way, and I think that it was very slippery there. I don't know what was going on there in that first turn, but it definitely felt like the riders did not expect the level of grip to be so low, and because of that, he was quite compromised at the start. But I mean, if you see how he was trying to move up Nice, I think you could read from there that he was very keen on having a very good result here. And I'm not saying that he doesn't have that in other races, but today it just felt like he was a man with a mission. Dive bomb central, where you kind of have that long asphalt section, and then you kind of have that turn where you go to the left just before the sand section was I think the dive bomb that he made there, passing like 4 or 5 riders. Dice definitely moved up, and I don't think that in the end it cost him too much. If you look at the end of the race, it just adds up. And with Diegem, it's all about the detail, because you can just see, he makes that mistake there, which is a very small mistake, to be honest, in the beginning of that last lap, and it costs him so much in the end in terms of energy and how much he has to spend to just get back in the wheels. And I think that was, you should definitely not underestimate how much he had to spend there in the first laps chasing and trying to get back in the race, which he did, and then have to chase again. And I think that is just, it adds up at a certain point, and that will definitely cost you a little bit. I think that in the last lap you can definitely count a lot more to that mistake, but overall in the race it wasn't the easiest of races, and he had to put a lot of effort in to get himself up the front. And I would say definitely not the most ideal race from Thibaut Nice. It's late.
It's late, and Nice is the last winner. Nice senior, that is. That wasn't named Van der Poel or Van Aert coming in here, so that was in 2013. But I think you make fair points, right? So definitely those efforts factored in for Nice, and if he hadn't had to do that, he could have potentially gotten away with that mistake in the final lap. But personally, I would always look at myself, and when the final lap starts, the race kind of just restarts. Everything that happens has become irrelevant, and you just need to execute there. And Zweig did that better. And yes, what you mentioned are completely fair points, and they did play a role. But in the end, also, he couldn't clip it into his pedal after the stairs. That cost him a second place. I don't think he would have been able to pass Zweig. It would have been close, but the finish is quite short considering you start from a dead standstill after a remount. He did, however, there lose out to Niels van de Putte. Let's talk about him now. He was racing here as the silent assassin because he has done a lot of races. He clearly did not have the legs that he's had earlier this season, but he rode it very smart. He was always up there in the positions, never really in the big jockeying for positions. Okay, his start was not amazing. He needed to spend some effort there as well, spend some energy to come back to the front, but it looked quite fine. And then he just kind of sat around, waited. Zweig wants to attack, Van Toerenhout wants to play games. Do whatever you want. I'm just going to sit here, wait for the final lap. He said he made his move a bit too early. I understand how he feels that way. It would have been hard, in my opinion, for him to take the win. It would definitely have been a stolen win. It's even a bit of a stolen second place based on the race dynamics, but it's also who Van der Putte is. His final lap is very good, and you also race with your brain, doing a smart race, executing smartly, good strategy. That also counts for something. So, of course, in the end, the results are there, right? It's maybe stolen because it's not 100% fair. Nice should have gotten second, but that's racing, and I also don't really mean anything bad by it.
No, and if you listen to his post race interview, he was really thinking about about the win, about the victory during the race. So he was positioning himself, thinking about victory, and as you say, he gave the impression, at least in how I looked at it as well, is that he was there for sure, and he closed some gaps quite impressively. I can remember when Van Torenhout was gone, that Van de Putte was one of the guys that definitely helped closing that gap, and he definitely looked very strong, but it just, for me, he never gave me the impression of someone that was going to be able to win. Even with his attack, I still kind of felt that was going to be an attack that will be countered in the end. And I see his point of where he states that he was maybe going a little bit too early on the last lap. You could say that was the case, but would that have changed the result? I don't know. I think that today, at least, Nice was probably the one that could have beaten Zweek. I think that Van de Putte was just not really on that level. But nevertheless, I think that if you look at his race and the way he was racing, the way he was positioning himself when he could, because he also, he wasn't there from the get-go. He had to make his way through there. But the way he did it and the way he raced today is definitely one that he could be proud of, and it was a very strong race. And maybe for that he got kind of rewarded with that second place. So I guess he can look back on a very strong ride today.
It's 3 days of rest now for Van de Putte, who's done a lot of races. I think he should do relatively okay in the races that come, and ultimately today he also does a very, very fine job in securing a very good position in the Superprestige. He now has a 5-point lead over Lars van der Haar with 2 races remaining. He definitely has more momentum behind him than Van der Haar. Van der Haar finished 6th. He featured, but he also didn't really feature in the race. He was there, but he couldn't really do anything. He had a good race in Gavere, but apparently he hit a pole of the course with his knee. That's why it was taped today. That's also why he didn't race in Besançon, and that might be affecting him a bit. But somebody who was in the mix coming into the race for the overall and now is completely out of that was Michael van Torenhout. Van Torenhout did ride a good race, Issam, but off camera he crashed in the penultimate lap on the off camber. Before that he also had another shoe change, the second day in a row. I mean, come on, what is that? If I'm Van Torenhout, I'm tossing those shoes away, switching to laces. 3 broken boas in a month? Come on, man. But even after that broken shoe, he still got back in the mix, but then it crashed there. It's not been his 2 days here.
No, absolutely not, and all for the wrong reasons, or at least reasons that normally is also something you don't really associate Van Torenhout with. He's not really the guy that makes those mistakes and gets involved in all that much trouble. But yeah, I think that for Van Torenhout it was, he definitely looked very strong. I think actually that he was, if he was able to stay within the battle, he would definitely have been someone that could contend for victory, at least a podium. But it wasn't meant to be, and as you say, the shoe. But he was actually able to bounce back from that, and then he crashes. We haven't seen on the broadcast how it looked or what was going on there, but something must have happened there. If you look at his body language, it definitely looked like someone that took a tumble and was quite hurt. So that was really a shame for Van Torenhout, because I felt that if you looked at how he was racing, it looked quite strong and it looked like someone that they had good form. And I have to say that after my comments in regards of seeing a decline in the form of Van Torenhout, despite the fact that I might be able to use some of the results to prove that, I think that there was no sign of that today. In all honesty, it was a Van Torenhout that was perfectly capable of racing up front, and yeah, it's a shame for him that he was not able to deliver, bring those good legs that he has at the moment to, and convert that to a good result.
We can only hope that he isn't too injured, because he did look quite hurt and he ultimately pulled out of the race as well. And that's definitely not something that he would do, considering when he got back on his bike, he was still up there. I mean, again, I said something about the shoes and not to stick with that, but that was also a weird moment. It was off camera, but he definitely crashed there together with Lars van der Haar and broke his shoe in that. Something happened there, because Van der Haar and Van Torenhout were further up than they were when the camera came back to them. Van der Haar also came into the pits for a new bike when Van Torenhout was changing shoes. So something definitely went wrong there. It was not his evening, and it was just like yesterday. It wasn't his day. He did get some help after that shoe change by Eli Iserbyt, and that was kind of a lifeline for Iserbyt, wasn't it? Because Iserbyt had quite a bad start. The Belgian commentators were talking about him plucking his bibs, and if he does that, that means that he has a bad day in terms of the injury he has with the nerve. But after that poor start, he kind of settled in, and where yesterday it was a bad start, today he also settled in and in the end finishes fifth, which I guess is a fine result, everything considered, because in the first 20 minutes you look at Iserbyt and you think, well, it's going to be nothing today.
Yeah, he definitely didn't give the signs of someone that would finish fifth in the end. And I think, if I recall correctly, I think that in the interview when he was talking about his injury, that he was saying that it could be sometimes that during the race, 1 or 2 laps it's just very bad, and then it kind of changes and it gets better. But that's kind of when you look now at a race of Iserbyt, you kind of have those question marks right now and those doubts, and you're like, is this again a moment in which he has an issue with that injury that he has currently? And I think that's for him, that must be a terrible feeling in a way, knowing that you have the legs and the form to be able to be in the mix, kind of getting held back by something outside of things that you can control in a way. And yeah, that's obviously a big shame. But today, again, as you say in the beginning, I would not give him a single dollar or euro or whatever. And then he kind of, other riders didn't have the greatest of races at some points, and he moved up. I think his pace also got better and better, and eventually you could see that, him chasing and getting himself in that position definitely cost him in the last lap to have that really final push, but he was still able to hang on somewhat, maintain his position somewhat. Del Grosso was someone that was able to get past. I think we will talk about him as well later on, but yeah, and eventually was able to finish in fifth. All by all, you could say an okay race, but I think that he, would not be all too happy. And I guess, to be honest, that Paul Sauser will not be all too happy with the results of their riders, because what could have been, in the end, didn't really get together for both guys.
I think Iserbyt will be modestly satisfied because it wasn't horrible, and it definitely looked like he settled in a bit more in the second half of the race. And also for him, you could see his experience showing, like he moves up in those groups immediately, and that was key on this course, right? If you were hanging at the back there, it was a really, really rough day for you, and you didn't really feature in there. If we look at the entire top 10, we see that Zweek took the win ahead of Van der Putten, Nijs, Del Grosso and Iserbyt. Van Haar finished 6th ahead of Kamp, Orts, Michels and Vermeers, who rounded out the top 10. Now let's also talk about Del Grosso, Issam. We spent some time yesterday in the U23 section. If you missed that, we talked extensively about what a showman Del Grosso is. He did the Cole Palmer victory celebration yesterday. He was doing a bunch of tail whips on the pump track in Besançon. He was the world champion, racing with pink gloves. He's a showman, and that was also seen today, right? He comes into the downhill 180 after the bridge, and he gets off the bike, slings it around, full Belgian sling. He does 2 big whips on the bridge. He's up there, and I think it was in Gavre that we spoke, like, what can he do, right? What can he do on a course like Zolder? Can he do better than he did last year? Last year in Zolder he was 5th, but the start list arguably was definitely not as stacked as it is here. And now he gets a course here which is a bit faster, which is probably still not that technical, but it's a different mix than where we've seen him race the elites before in Amur and Gavre, and here he performs even better than there. And yes, okay, Van der Poel isn't there, but still, it's a really, really good performance by him.
Yeah, and I think the way he raced as well, he was like, it was someone that actually had the chance of racing for a top 3. And I think that's, next to the potential that he already has, today was just, again, somewhat of a showboat at times, but I kind of like that, I have to say. I mean, I'm somewhat of a fan of the way he is racing, the way he presents himself. It's, it's a character, and I think that today, again, the potential the way he was racing. I think that it definitely helps a race like Diegem that, as you say, there's definitely some asphalt sections and it's somewhat of a crit. Those are probably elements that play in his favor. But regardless of that, I think that he rode a very good race. I liked the way he was sitting in the wheel of Iserbit on the last lap, really making him do the efforts and then try to get in front and finish it off, and he did so. So I think that in the end it was could he have done much more? I don't know. Maybe he shouldn't have been the one taking initiative, trying to bring back Van Toeren out early on. At times he maybe gave up positions a bit too easy, and then you have to kind of get back. But he never really panicked. He never, at least from my view, never really put in too much effort to get positions back. He tried to play it smart. So I think it's a great race, and it just shows what he can become. I think that if he continues his growth, continues the progress, stays calm, which at the moment looks like he has that within him to stay calm and trust the process, as they say. We have to wait and see how that will all play out, but today again was a great race for the main favorite, I guess, for the under-23, and someone that we will probably hear about way more in the next couple of seasons for sure. Maybe already this season, but most likely next seasons and the seasons that will come.
Yeah, definitely. And he is a cool guy. He doesn't lose his cool in the race typically. And also before the race, this is a story told from Hoogheide last year. Like, he's on the front row, he needs to go to the bathroom, he just leaves his bike there with 3 minutes till the start. He goes into the porta potty, comes out, gives his girlfriend Laura Molengraaf a kiss. I don't know if they're still together, but they were definitely back then. And then he gets on his bike and then he just shoots off and takes victory. He doesn't really seem bothered by anything. His race was smart today and he definitely delivered. I think the only other rider I really thought was worth mentioning in the top 10 was Ryan Kamp. He rode a good race. He did an all or nothing attack when he got back onto that group, and that was also kind of everything he could give, right? If he wanted to have any shot at taking the victory or a podium place here, he had to catch them by surprise. And he tried that. It didn't happen, but it was probably his best race of the season. Then I think we should go to the women's races. Some they started the day, or at least the evening, at 6. It was a interesting first lap with Benveld taking the lead, but ultimately Alvarado, Van der Heijden and Brandt getting away. Brandt and Alvarado were stronger than Van der Heijden. They put her under pressure a bit. Van der Heijden yo-yoed a bit, kind of like we saw in Mol. But then ultimately, after an attack, multiple attacks, I would have to say, of Brandt, it was Alvarado who took the lead, and then Brandt turned it around. So she powered away in the penultimate lap, taking the win ahead of Alvarado and Van der Heijden. Alvarado, yesterday we were discussing in the podcast, well, what was up with her? Was there any explanation for this poor performance, this result that we didn't really expect from her? And the story came out eventually today that she had very cold hands. Then today she doesn't really have it against Brandt, but that's also not that surprising to me because this course really favors Brandt, and you could see it. Was it the second or the third lap where Brandt just kept hammering attack after attack after attack? She was in the zone here.
Yeah, she definitely was in the zone, and the race was developing. I thought at a certain point, it's going to be a difficult race for Brandt here, because Alvarado, in my opinion, the course that they got is something that I would favor Alvarado maybe a little bit more. And at a certain point, Brandt was not getting that well through the scent, but I think that she kind of got somewhat better and better. And then at a certain point, it switched, and the momentum was completely on the other side, and Brandt was the one that was able to put Alvarado under pressure. And yeah, I think that Brandt kind of, if you look at her season so far, she had a lot of races in which she was very good and had very good legs, but there was always like someone that could change it up, and eventually it wasn't for victory, despite the fact that she definitely won her races this season. But I guess I hope that you know what I mean. But it was, in the end, I think that Brandt today just had a very strong... I think that her start definitely played a role as well today, because And I don't know for what reason, but I could imagine in a way also with the starting field that we had, because the start wasn't the greatest, but she kind of managed to get herself within somewhat of a decent position, and that didn't cost her. And I think from there on, it was a fair game between her and Alvarado. Bike change from Alvarado, and Brandt just made so much use of that, and Alvarado never. She saw her up there, but was never able to catch up to Brandt, and that was all there was for the battle. And Brandt was in control from there and took the win.
It was an ill-timed bike change by Alvarado, and there was no real explanation for it. I think she just needed new machinery. In the men's race, Nys went in. He definitely changed something to his tires, because after that he did much better through the sand. That's something we didn't mention, but the sand passage of Nys in the penultimate lap was really, really fabulous. But back to the women's race, yes, Brandt had a good start and that played a role, but I don't really know how you can say this is a course that suits Alvarado more, because we've seen it all season that if it comes down to pure power, Brandt is able to definitely put Alvarado under a lot of pressure. And this course is ultimately down to power. You have a 30-second road climb in there. It's a combination between road and grass. Where does Alvarado excel? Where does she take her victories? She took her victory in Mol because she was better through the sand than Brandt. She took her win in Zonhoven because she was better through the sand, mostly, and on the technical sections, and her start was better. If you look at her wins in Hamme, it's also because she has Brandt on the ropes through the technical sections. And today she just didn't get any of those sections. It came down to pure power. And if you look at the pure power courses, with maybe the exception of Namur, which has a bunch of technical features, but look at Antwerpen. Look at, for instance, earlier this season Overijse, which had a bit more climbing involved, but still. Those are the courses where Alvarado struggles a bit. And I think today you get that. And if other riders are here, which you can only beat who's there, but you get even more riders up there, right? Like, this is also a good course for Zoe Backstedt. Banca Vash could do quite decent here as well. So I definitely feel this result was quite expected, especially considering the start field. And I mean, it's for Flanders Classics, I don't know how they look at this, right? Because clearly they care about the Superprestige. It's their own classification. It's the oldest cyclocross classification. At the same time, they want the World Cup to be the only important classification. I mean, they've definitely achieved that in the women's side, because the top 10 today here is much, much worse than what we saw yesterday in Besançon. And just in general, both races are part of the Flanders Classics curriculum, but this is one that they have a bigger finger in. Besançon is organized by the local bike club, and you could see it, like the LED barriers, they were here. Besançon only had one big screen because all the other LED screens were here. I passed the LED truck, the sport LED truck, on the way back. That would never have made it here on time for Diegem. I don't think they could really have used that. It couldn't leave yesterday evening, so I wonder how they look at that.
I have no idea how they're looking at it. I think that is for them. They made no secret of it that for them the World Cup is the classification that needs to be the most important. But currently we can really see that the Superprestige is struggling in the sense, especially on the women's side. It's quite a poor strength of field what we are getting on the women's side. It's not the most complete starting fields that we have, and in many ways you can compare it somewhat to the XO Trophy, and I think that is a comparison no classification wants to make. So I think that if you look at it right now with the Superprestige, it's in a situation in which it's struggling, and I think they have to figure it out. How can they make sure that it stays? And if it doesn't stay as important as it is, what are you going to do? Are you going to reduce the races? Are you going to reduce the prize money and put more in the prize money in the World Cup? Since at the moment it looks like that prize money is going to stay the same for next year. So inflation, I guess, has no impact on the prize money for the World Cup. I don't know what Flanders Classic wants to do, to be honest, because we know that they prioritize the World Cup, but then you look at how the Superprestige is now being treated, and that is somewhat because of the consequences of how they have tried to put the World Cup as the most important classification. So in that regard, you could say, hey guys, you succeeded, but it lacks kind of this whole complete picture. And what do they want to do with the rest? I mean, if you look at that classification right now of the Superprestige, it's on the women's side for sure it's a joke. Like the top 10 makes no sense whatsoever. I think that is just it's incredible how we basically have just two women that really care about the classification currently, or three, you could say. And from there on, it's basically just either riders that were able to complete all the races, or riders that maybe did good in 2 or 3 races, and then from there on didn't really care about doing another Superprestige race. And I think that is definitely not how you want to have your top 10 in order, and especially in a classification which always was known as being close, and despite the fact that it's very close up front, because of the fact that you have the 1 point difference. So yeah, not the best of situations they have currently there in the Superprestige, and they have to look at it and change some things up. But I think for next year it looks like this is probably going to be the same thing over again.
I mean, in general, we can erase the question, what is the value of classifications in cross at the moment, when so many of the best riders, like Vash, like Schreiber, like Backstedt, like when they start their season so late, they don't care about the classifications, they care about the rainbow jersey. So that's one point to raise. And then secondly, like, does the Superprestige actually need to change anything? Yes, it's a dire situation that you can see, for instance, Casasola misses the last 2 races and still sits in 4th. In the past, that wouldn't have happened like that. Van Empel has raced 2 races and sits in 9th in this classification. Just outside of the top 10, the sheet that they don't show you, it's even more dire, right? So, for instance, Helen Clausel is 14th with 2-point finishes. And they are definitely not as high as the finishes of Van Empel. So, do they need to change something? That depends on the paradox, right? They also organize the World Cup. They want all the other classifications to be inferior to the World Cup. So that is job succeeded. And I think as long as they have a few people like Alvarado and Brandt, the full-timers, care about their classification, which is not the case for the X2O trophy, then they are in a better place than the X2O trophy, and they kind of can stick with the status quo. And as long as the riders do a number of the races and they sell the tickets for that, which was definitely the case today. There were more than 20,000 people there today. Yesterday in Besançon, good attendance, between 10 and 12,000. Today, nearly double of that, between 20 and 25,000. Also for the Turbo Cross, which drew a lot of spectators. It's the perfect beer race here, just a good excuse to drink a ton of beer on a weeknight. Most people have the day off tomorrow, so it's always a good event here. And as long as those attendances, especially for their important races in this time of the year, are still up and they can break even and survive on the other races in there, I think they won't bother too much that their women's side is suffering, especially because most they care about is the men's side, and there you definitely have more riders caring about it. So Van der Putten, Van der Haarsweek, Van Toerenhout, Viseur, Iserbiet, Orts, the list of riders who did all of them or were planning on doing all of them is much longer, which helps them. So if we now go back to the actual racing here in Diegem instead of our technical discussion about the Superprestige, what did you think of Inger van der Heijden today? And also, we got a question about what happened to her in the pits yesterday in Besançon.
Maybe I start with Besançon first, so we got that out of the way. I think when you brought it up, I had some distant memory of what happened there, but I had to really watch the replay again to have that memory a bit close to me and really know what happened. I mean, it looked like when Van der Heijden entered the pit zone, she kind of looked to her mechanic, and it seems like, the mechanic was kind of hinting something, and the mechanic maybe picked it up in the wrong way and moved more forward. And I think that is definitely not something that Van der Heijden wanted to happen. And I think from there on, the angle in which she had to swap bikes was terrible, because the first guy that probably that should have been handed the bike over wasn't there, because she had to throw the bike in a way. And then when she had to pick up the new bike, it was in such a weird angle that she had to drop the bike and somewhat carry it over the ground and pick it up again, which wasn't the most ideal thing. But I think if you look at that situation, is in my eyes, it looked like it was some miscommunication between mechanic and rider, which happens. Those those pit zones are sometimes crazy out there. The riders, when they have to get through there, it can sometimes be a bit hectic. In this case, she had somewhat time, but she was in a fight. It was in the last lap, so things could sometimes be interpreted a little bit wrong, and I think that was somewhat the case in that regard. If I would go on about her race, I think that for Van der Heijden, we saw again a very strong Van der Heijden, but we saw Van der Heijden again that when it mattered the most, and when Brandt and Alvarado are really going to put the pace on, I think that for her it just gets a little bit more difficult, and she's just then not really able to hang on that much. I think today again was a fantastic race from her side, one of the better ones she's ridden this season, and she made use of the starting field today. I think that if you look at that starting field, for sure it was, a third place was well within her possibility to be achieved, and she delivered. So I think from her regard, despite the chain issue that she had, I think on the last lap, I think that it was a very solid outing. She was in the mix, and we have kind of seen that before already this season, where when the pace is really put there up front, somewhere halfway through the race, she kind of struggles a little bit and doesn't really have it to stay in the mix and battle for victory. So I think another very solid race from Van der Heijden.
Definitely. Let's look at the entire top 10 then. So behind Brandt, Alvarado and Van der Heijden was Bentveld. After a fast start, she couldn't hang in there. A very eager Sanne Kan finished 5th ahead of Aniek van Alphen. Letitia Borghesi finished 7th ahead of Anna Kay and Ella McLean-Howell. 10th place went to Marte Truije. Also in this race, 2 broken shoes. Issam, Marte Truije had a broken shoe, and De Beer also broke her boa after a crash. I think I've made my point here enough about the shoes now, so I think 2 things are worth mentioning here. The start field here didn't have the same level. There were a lot of absences because yesterday's race in Besançon, more absences because riders like, for instance, Ribeiro and Betsema didn't feel like racing despite being on the start list due to yesterday's race. Then a couple of illnesses, so for instance, no Puk Pietersen for that reason. And then there's the result of Borghesi, who I think deserved more TV attention because it was a really good result by her. She's a rider for EF Education. She, I think 2 seasons ago now, kind of when she was teammates with Backstedt, kind of got drawn into it. She raced in Val di Sol. I remember that Dieter van Toerenhout sent me a message on Instagram then if I could take some videos of her so he could use that for his coaching. He was coaching Zoe Backstedt back then. She has of course done cross for a long time, definitely not necessarily at this level. This is by far her best result of her career, and whilst this is not her priority, it's still cool to see her do so well. Last year she finished 2nd at the Italian Championships. That's probably based more on power than her ability, and this course suits her well, but it was a very cool result. And I think with that we're going to wrap it up, Issam, because we're nearing the midnight clock here, and this still needs to be edited before it goes out, and I would like to get some sleep in before tomorrow as well.
Where the sleep will also be hampered by the fireworks going off. But yeah, I think we have done a somewhat of a good job going through the races. I mean, the men's race was a little more exciting, and there was more eventful, I guess, than the women's race. But we have had plenty of races where it was the other way around. So I think that it was just a great night race. Enjoyed it, and thank you for having me.
Yeah, so thank you for being there. We are going to be back tomorrow then, and we will... No. Yeah, it's borderline now, but it's still 5 to 12, so it's not tomorrow. The day after tomorrow, we are going to be back to cover New Year's Day racing in Paal. X2O Trophy, that is. Thanks everyone for listening, and catch you guys then. Goodbye.